Hi everybody, it's me, Miss Landavaso. They asked me to read a story to you and I said, heck yeah, I want to read a story to you. I miss you guys a lot and I pray that you're all safe and in your homes right now and staying healthy. The story that I'm going to read today is called A Selfish Giant. It's a tale of generosity. Here we go. Every day after school, a group of children who lived near a huge empty castle played in an enchanted garden. The garden was enchanted because it stayed summer all year long. The trees in the enchanted garden never lost their leaves. Flowers bloomed all year, and it never got cold there. Sometimes it rained in the garden, but only at nighttime when the children were sleeping soundly in their beds. The children skipped rope, swung from the tree branches, and played games in the enchanted garden. And when they got hungry, they plucked the fruit from the trees of the garden, and they ate as they enjoyed the sunshine that never ended. The children were happiest when they were in the garden. They loved to play there every day. The empty castle did not stay empty for long. It belonged to a giant who had been away for many years. One day he returned home, hoping to find some peace and quiet after his long journey. Instead, he returned to the sound of laughter in his garden. He did not like what he saw when he looked over the garden wall. There were children playing all sorts of games and eating fruit from his trees. "What are you children doing there?" the giant shouted. "This is my garden." The giant's booming voice startled the children, and they were so shaken that they could not answer his question. But then the giant was in no mood to listen either for any reasons why he should share his garden. He was a selfish giant. The giant stormed into the garden and ordered all the children to leave at once. "Get down from those trees!" he roared. "Get out of my garden and never come back!" The children didn't understand why the giant wanted them to leave. No one had ever sent them away. The children were frightened of the grumpy giant, and they ran from the garden as fast as they could. Once the children were gone, the giant looked around and the empty garden and smiled. Finally, he would have some peace and quiet. "No noise, no pesky children running around," he muttered to himself. "Just me and my garden." He was a selfish giant. The children no longer had a place to play. They tried playing in other yards and gardens, but no place compared to their enchanted garden. One day, they stopped outside the garden wall. They thought that if they could at least be close to the garden, they would once again be happy. One curious boy wanted to see the garden with his own eyes, so he climbed onto his friend's shoulders and peeked over the garden wall. The boy gasped at what he saw. The leaves of the tree were turning orange and were falling to the ground. The grass that was once thick and green were now thin and brown. The flowers had wilted and the birds had flown away. "What has happened to our wonderful garden? It looks like it's dying," one of the children said. And all the children became sad. Their beautiful garden was no longer enchanted. Soon the garden became cold and a lonely place. All the trees were bare, and the grass was the color of straw, and the sun never shone there any more. One day, as the giant passed in front of the castle window overlooking the garden, a flower poked its head through the ground. The giant watched the flower, and he began to hope it would bloom. But a strong gust of wind came and scared the flower back under the ground. The giant sighed. He didn't understand the changes that had taken place in his garden. And when he returned from his journey, the garden was warm and full of life, but now it was dull and cold. "At least now I have peace and quiet," the giant said, "and I don't have to share the garden with anybody." The giant was a selfish giant. The passing months brought even more changes to the garden. Snow blanketed the ground, icicles dangled from the walls of the castle, and cold wind ripped through the branches of the trees. The giant now spent many hours of his day watching the garden from the castle window. The giant could not figure out why it was so cold inside the walls of his garden. He knew that it no longer was winter time, and the rest of the countryside was warm and not covered with snow. "Something is wrong," the giant said. He began to wish for his beautiful garden and for the children who had made it such a happy place. For the first time, the giant felt lonely. By now the children had surely found another place to play, the giant thought. They no longer needed his garden to make them happy. That's what he thought. But the giant was wrong. The children stopped outside the garden every day wishing that they could play there again. And one day, as a child leaned against the garden wall, a stone wiggled loose and fell out. The hole that left was big enough for them to crawl through. The children looked at each other excitedly, and they crawled through the secret passage one by one. When their feet touched the ground, the snow in the garden began to melt. The grass turned green and the sun began to shine again. And when the children touched the trees, the green leaves appeared. The birds came back and sang pretty songs. The children were filled with joy to be back in the enchanted garden. But in a small corner of the garden, icicles still hung there. In a single tree, a little boy looked up at the tree sadly. He wanted to climb it, but he was too small to reach the branches. The boy anxiously circled the tree. Then he stopped and looked up at the high branches. He had waited such a long time to play in the trees in the enchanted garden. Now that he had a chance, he could not reach the lowest branch. The boy just sat under the tree and began to cry. Suddenly, the boy felt a huge pair of hands gently lift him up and set him on one of the branches. Instantly, the icicles that clung to the tree began to melt. The tiny buds opened and the leaves sprouted all over the tree. The surprised little boy turned to see the giant who had once roared with anger at the children. This time the giant smiled and patted the little boy on the head. The boy flung his arms around the giant's neck and he kissed him on the cheek. The giant's heart melted as quickly as the ice and the snow in his garden. He was sorry that he had been so selfish. When the children saw that they no longer had to fear the giant, they rushed over to him. The giant scooped them up one by one and hugged them gently. "Does this mean that we may sometimes play in your enchanted garden?" asked the shy child. The other children quickly waited to hear what the giant would say. The giant now realized that it was the children who brought the magic to the garden. "From now on, this is your garden," the giant said to the children. "You may come here and play whenever you wish." The enchanted garden was more fun than ever. The giant was no longer selfish, and in fact he became the children's favorite playmate. The children loved every minute they spent in the garden, and so did the giant. He had the most enchanted time of all. This is about generosity. The giant refused to share his garden with the children because he was selfish. He wanted peace and quiet, and when he sent the children away, he got plenty of that, but he also got something more, loneliness. He didn't have anybody around, so he was all by himself. The giant finally realized that the children were not the nuisance. They brought beauty to the garden and joy to his heart. The giant came to know this joy only after he decided to share his garden with the children. You need to share. In the end, he was very generous and a happy giant. This story reminds us that sharing your belongings can be much more fun than keeping them all for yourself. It was my pleasure to read you this story. I miss you very much, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.